If a modern US Navy base was invaded by Vikings, what does it mean? We considered the two most likely scenarios, and the results are pretty interesting. The first scenario is the most realistic and quick one. History shows us what happens when technology clashes with raw courage. But that's too boring. Now, let's get to the good stuff. In the second scenario, let's imagine the Vikings had some kind of secret weapon. A mental fortitude so strong, they didn't just run away when the first fighter jet screamed past. They stood their ground, their eyes fixed on the sky. So, who are the players in this crazy game? On one side, we have the Navy base. It's not just a collection of buildings, it's a fortress. Inside are Marines and SEALs ready for a fight. They have armored Humvees, powerful rifles, and machine guns that fire hundreds of rounds a minute. This place is a living, breathing military machine. A single fighter jet is just one of its many terrifying parts. This isn't a simple battle. It's a clash of two different eras, with a few thousand Vikings going head-to-head with the modern world's technology. Their bravery against our overwhelming firepower. Facing them, thousands of Vikings slam axes against the shields, a war drum thunder that shakes the field. Their campfire smoke rises in twisting columns, carrying the sharp scent of sweat, leather, and iron. They also have longships, even though they're not able to stop bullets. In reality, the Viking fleet was probably a lot bigger than we usually imagine. These were often smaller vessels that followed the main fleet, but we're not going to count them here since they weren't part of the core invasion, and including them would make it way too overpowered. It's easy to focus on the fighting, but the real game changer was logistics, and this is where the whole game could shift. A Navy base depends on non-stop supplies. Take that away, and it's only a matter of time. The personnel only carry food for a short time. Vikings built their strength through raids, feeding themselves with whatever they tore from the land or the villages they struck, giving them a big advantage over the long haul. The Marines actually have one sneaky advantage. It was clean drinking water. Thanks to their little purification tablets, they can make almost any water safe. Don't make it heroic. It's a lifesaver. The Vikings were also historically known to win a lot of their longer raids by quickly resupplying their forces from conquered villages. With every raid, they gained more than food. They often walked away with weapons and sometimes even new fighters to join their cause. Hungry Marines would be pushed into the Viking woods, but in that place, every shadow hides a weapon, every tree could be the end. Just one slip, and the forest claims them. But that's a risky move because it would mean entering forested and rural areas where they know the terrain much better, increasing the chances of getting ambushed. The Marines' biggest advantage is distance. That is, their weapons can drop a Viking way before an axe ever comes close. Still, that edge doesn't last forever. The moment the battle moves into forests or tight terrain, ambushes slash away their sightlines. If the clash ever closed to hand-to-hand combat, the Marines' advantage would vanish, leaving them badly exposed. Not only do they have much less training for it, but the modern gear is built to keep soldiers moving, not to stop sword strikes leaving their arms and legs as weak points. Marines usually wear a flak jacket and a Kevlar helmet, which leaves their limbs, face, and lower body completely exposed, as mobility is a big priority in modern warfare. At the same time, a Viking shield wall or chainmail could shrug off strikes that modern Marine armor was never built to face. The Vikings could torch their villages or go without food. Yet still, the Navy wouldn't see a chance to restock. When pushed into a corner, they'd torch their own supplies to starve out their enemies, even if it meant sacrificing their villages, for example, when they burned food supplies and cities the enemy could use to resupply. They'd even send less valuable warriors, like thralls, to keep the enemy under constant attack and stress until they were worn down, then attack with their main force. For the Marines, speed means survival. If the fight drags on, the Vikings' sheer numbers and stamina will overwhelm them. Which is exactly why the Marines would be forced to fight on open ground, relying on speed and mobility to hold the Vikings at bay, which would leave them vulnerable to supply issues. We also have to remember that the Vikings were really good at dividing their enemies with promises of power and rewards, but since we're ignoring morale, we'll leave that out. The Navy does have one big logistical advantage though: night vision goggles. This gives them the ability to operate effectively at night, something the Vikings couldn't even imagine. If the Navy personnel attacked Viking camps at night to stock up on supplies or take out warriors, their chances of success would be incredibly high. But now, let's get to the meat of the battle. Considering the equipment the Navy personnel carry and the fact that they have far fewer men, it's more likely that their quickness of movement will allow them to choose where the battle takes place. The best terrain for them would be a plain with no natural cover, except one for them to defend themselves from the Vikings launching their spears. The Vikings would probably charge towards them, so imagine watching the Marines move like one group blasting away while the other runs ahead, then they swap. Step by step, it was a deadly rhythm that the Vikings just couldn't escape. How would the Viking fight back? The only real option was to try and surround the Navy and break that cycle of retreat and shooting. This would require them to spread out, making them much less vulnerable to grenades and bullets, giving them a huge advantage. A shield wall might hold against arrows, but under modern gunfire it would collapse fast, leaving the Vikings no choice but to break apart and fan out. But that would make the Viking army 10 kilometers long, which would be extremely difficult to organize and keep compact. The Navy would easily shoot at them or reposition while they try to organize. The edges of the line would be so far from the Navy that Viking warriors would end up running blindly, essentially advancing with no clear orientation. They could try moving forward in layers instead of all at once, but honestly, the casualties would still pile up fast. The Vikings spread themselves wide, their shield wall stretching almost 2 kilometers across the field. It was an impressive sight, a wall of men bristling with spears and axes, moving forward with grim determination. But no thunder of hooves came to break the silence, only the steady tramp of warriors on foot. In the base, defenders watched through high-powered scopes, their sensors marking every movement. A single word was spoken. Then, the crack of gunfire tore the air. The Vikings' advance slowed, their line wavered, and the long march into battle turned into a slaughter before a single axe could be swung. The best way for the Vikings to close the distance with the Navy would be to use a front line of expendable warriors armed only with swords, allowing them to run as fast as possible toward the enemy. These soldiers would serve as sacrificial pawns, enabling the troops behind them to get closer to the Navy personnel. And the real nightmare for the Vikings was the Marines had the M240B, a machine gun that can unleash nearly 1,000 bullets in just 60 seconds. These powerful weapons can fire up to 950 rounds per minute. They require reloading after every 100 rounds, a process that takes about 5 seconds, and the barrel must occasionally be replaced, which also takes 5 seconds. It'd be like throwing dry leaves into a bonfire, which means it's gone in seconds for the advancing Vikings, forcing them to prioritize taking out these gunners with their spears. And the brutal math held in this situation was each Marine would need to cut down more than 100 Vikings just to stay alive. However, it's worth noting that Marines are issued a standard ammo load, but ask any of them, and you'll find their packs stuffed with more. It's because when the fighting starts, you can't have enough. One major advantage of the Navy that we haven't yet considered is the possibility of tear gas. They also have gas masks, which would provide them with a massive edge over the Vikings, who would have no means of protection against it. So yes, the Vikings wouldn't stand a chance in a direct clash, but when it's 5,000 of them, the Marines aren't coming out without scars. However, the Vikings might still have a chance if they adopt a more strategic approach, such as engaging in a war of attrition, waiting for the Navy to finish their supplies while avoiding ambushes at night. We could also consider a third scenario. The Navy personnel cannot be descendants of the Vikings, as killing them would create a time travel paradox that might also kill the personnel themselves. However, that is a whole other thing, so just forget about it. But this clash is only one storm. Now imagine if this battle wasn't Vikings, then what if it was samurai, Mongols, or even Spartans facing a modern military base? That's a story for another day, but tell me which matchup you'd want next in the comments. And hey, if you want more wild history meets modern war mashups, you know what to do. Just like, share, and subscribe.